This is the recipe I use to make roasted garlic and rosemary sourdough bread. I'm going to start with 375 grams of lukewarm water, and to that I'm going to add 50 grams of active sourdough starter and whisk that up well with a fork. Then I'm going to add 480 grams of high protein bread flour. I like to use Keen Arthur's bread flour, and 20 grams of whole wheat flour. And then I'm just going to whisk this up with a fork. And when it gets too stiff to continue with a fork, I'm going to switch to my hand and just knead the dough until all the flour pockets have been absorbed. The dough is really sticky at this point. That's perfectly fine. It should be. Then I'm going to cover that with some plastic wrap and let it rest for about 45 minutes to an hour. After it's rested, I'm going to take 10 grams of fine sea salt and add about a quarter teaspoon of water just to help it start dissolving. Remove the dough and transfer the salt onto the dough. Reach under the dough and pull it up and over the salt. And then we're just going to work this dough until the salt has been completely dissolved into the dough. Now it's really sticky at this point. That's okay. It's a little bit stiff too, but as you work with it, it will become more pliable. And then eventually I'm going to start slapping it against the counter as I knead it. And this will help with the gluten structure. This is after 5 to 7 minutes of kneading. You can see it's much more pliable. It's starting to get sticky again. And at this point, the dough is ready for its bulk rise. I'm going to transfer it back into the bowl, cover it with plastic wrap, and let it rest on the counter for about 8 to 12 hours. I let the dough rise overnight, so in the morning I'm going to heat my oven to 450 degrees and roast my garlic. Take a garlic bowl, cut off about 1/3 of the top of the bowl to expose those garlic cloves, drizzle it with a little bit of olive oil, then put it in some tin foil and roast it in the hot oven for about 45 minutes to an hour. You want all those cloves to be nice and soft. Then I'm going to remove them from the foil, let them cool for about 15-20 minutes, and then gently squeeze the garlic cloves out of their paper sacks. Now this is a roasted garlic and rosemary loaf. The rosemary is optional, but if you do want to add it, I used about 3 large sprigs of rosemary and just chopped it up. Then I'm going to prepare the bowl for the dough. I'm going to take about a 9-inch oblong bowl, put a tea towel in it, and dust that with a little bit of flour to help prevent the dough from sticking later on when we transfer into the bowl. Now you can see this dough is ready. There's some bubbles at the surface and it jiggles when you wiggle the bowl. Put a little bit of flour down on the counter because the dough is still sticky, and gently remove the dough from the bowl. Sprinkle some flour around the edges and just tuck the flour under the dough with a bench scraper. This will help prevent the dough from sticking to the counter. And then I'm just going to gently, ever so gently, stretch out the edges of the dough into a rough rectangle or circle. Take that rosemary and sprinkle it over the dough. And then take the garlic and break them up into small pieces and sprinkle them over the surface of the dough. When all the garlic and rosemary are on the dough, you'll just want to fold up each side of the dough until the rosemary and garlic are completely hidden. Then you're going to flip the dough over and start to work on tightening the shape. Now the dough is sticking to my hands, so I need to get a little bit of flour on my hands. I don't want to add any flour to the work surface, otherwise it's going to be terrible. I'm not going to be able to get the dough to traction, and I won't be able to get the nice taut surface tension on the dough that I need. Going to work back and forth, just tightening up this shape a little bit, and you'll see the rosemary starts popping up to the surface. If I continue at this point, the rosemary will start coming out. So I'm going to dust the dough with a little bit of flour and then cover it with plastic wrap for about 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, the dough has relaxed a little bit and we can flour up our hands and really get the nice tight shape we need on this loaf. Just continue gently. And you can see the rosemary and garlic are starting to appear all over the surface, so it's time to transfer the loaf into our prepared towel and bowl. Then I'm going to sprinkle it with some flour to prevent the towel from sticking. And then I'm going to wet the top portion of the towel with water and then just wring the towel out so it's damp and cover the bread with it. And let the bread rise on the counter for about half an hour, and then you could bake it at that point, but I'm going to put it in the refrigerator for an additional 6 hours. Alright, time to score this loaf. You're going to need parchment paper, a serrated knife, and a sharp razor blade. Invert the dough onto the parchment paper, sprinkle the loaf with some flour, and then I'm going to create a slanted cut so that we get a nice ear on this loaf, and then just some decorative small cuts with a razor blade in the shape of a wheat head. Now I've preheated my oven at 450 with the Dutch oven for about an hour, so the Dutch oven is nice and hot. I'm going to transfer the loaf into the Dutch oven using the parchment paper sling, put the lid on, and bake for 30 minutes with the lid on, and then I'm going to remove the lid and bake it for another 30 minutes, checking at about 20 minutes to make sure it's not getting too dark. And there you have it, a beautiful roasted garlic and rosemary sourdough bread.